Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. Like I just said, I'm delighted to be joined by Nigel today from Bauder. Nigel, welcome. He is there, he's just on mute. I can guarantee he's there.
Good morning.
Morning. And today we're going to have a more of an open discussion than it is a presentation, although Nigel's going to run us through a few slides to begin with, on responding to changing demands in flat roofing. I'm your host, Pete Sumpton. I'm delighted to be joined by Nigel, today's Technical Director of Bauder. Okay, so let's get this admin stuff out of the way first and foremost. As you know, or if you're new and you don't know, BBA run these webinars every other week or every week like we've done during March. And you can find out current and future webinars by going to that URL that's on your screen at the moment. The reason we put the URL in this slide deck, you can't click on it, is because we do a PDF that you can, of all the slides, which you can download later, which that link will be live. A better way to keep up to date with any webinars that are coming up in the future is to sign up to our newsletter, and we'll tell you way in advance of all the webinars that are coming out throughout the year. Okay, so that's enough of that. As you can see on the screen, that's what our webinar page looks like for past webinars as well, which you can watch the recordings and you can download the slides. Okay, so who are the BBA? For over, it's actually 56 years now, I think. The BBA have been helping construction and manufacturing industries build confidence in their solutions, their designs, their products, their applications that are implemented throughout the construction supply chain. And that's not just in the UK, that's from a global marketplace perspective, looking to build long-term partnerships with organizations to do that. Two important things. BBA always remain reassuringly impartial, got to. And one thing you might not know is that the BBA are actually a for-profit organisation limited by guarantee, which means that any profits that the BBA make are reinvested in the industry as a whole for the benefit of you and I and the wider stakeholder community. Just a little bit about what the BBA actually do. More commonly known for PAC, Product Approval Certification, which includes BBA Agreement Certificate, Reproduction Certification, and HAPAS. But the BBA also do testing, audit and inspection, management systems such as ISO 9001, and more recently UKCA marking and UKTA. Just to show you the size of the organisation and what the BBA actually do on a day-to-day basis. So far, we've issued over 6,000 certificates, and in the bottom right, the bigger number there, we do over 8,000 annual inspections and assessments. So not only are we reassuringly impartial, we are embedded in a bedrock in that whole construction supply chain. Okay, final slide from me before I hand over to Nigel. What we'll cover. We're going to look at the current state of flat roofing, the different types of flat roofing that we might look to utilise today and tomorrow, changing demands within the marketplace, how we might tackle these changes, but maintain the quality of our flat roofing products and applications, and then the future of flat roofing from Bauder's perspective, but also from the wider perspective within the marketplace and the industry as a whole. Now, I just want to highlight, now everyone's on the call and I've done my boring bit, and I can jump over to Nigel in a second for the interesting part, is if you've got any questions, please use this webinar, the Q&A functionality, or the chat functionality to put your questions to Nigel, and we'll do our best to get to them. Time's limited, but we'll do our best. If we don't answer them within this webinar, we will get back to you at a later date, probably by email, to answer that question. We will get back to you, but please use it because this is your time to ask those important questions. Okay, that's enough from me. I'd like to hand over to Nigel. Many of you might know Nigel, but I'll hand over to him to give an introduction for himself and to kick us off in terms of flat roofing and what the future holds. Nigel, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. First of all, I'm Nigel Blacklock, Technical Director at Bauder. I've for many years been technical chair for a single ply roofing association, and basically have been involved in most of the British Standard and European technical committees to do with flat roofing. Today, I'm going to talk about something slightly oblique in the fact that we're normally used to talking about waterproofing, insulation, and flat roof systems. I'm going to be talking about things above the waterproofing line. So, Peter, if we can move on. So basically, one of the things that inspired me to do this was at the turn of the year, the NFRC commissioned or published a commissioned study by the University of Southampton on the impact of climate change and the future for roofs. And it's come out with lots of different conclusions, but one of the really interesting conclusions was how we could use our roofs for other things than just keeping the water out. Now, also, at the same time, the flat roof industry has launched an initiative that you may have heard of called Look Up. Not to be confused with the Netflix Don't Look Up. But this is something where we're really looking at making more use of our roofs above. So what I'm going to do is just talk you through some of these different opportunities. And so first of all, I'm going to talk about what I refer to as the amenity roofs. And so these are places where you can often create leisure spaces. Here we see even some lawn for amenity space, but often the likes of podium, and tend to be often public places where we're mixing different types of landscaping, both hard landscaping and soft landscaping. We then also have amenity through living spaces, and these often can be more private spaces where there could be anything from just a concrete or timber or metal terraced area, which you can put tables, chairs, etc. on, or you can have your own areas for growing whatever you wish more immediately to your own space. But then we come on to what I'm going to differentiate as utility roofs. So clearly what we've just been looking at, you get amenity from, but here is where we're actually getting some utility. We're actually making the roofs work for us. And so on the left here, we're looking at a typical PV roof system. And then on the right, the sort of combination of perhaps a green roof with a PV roof, which Bauder we would call biosolar, and something where you can combine both. Something that many specifiers don't always realize is possible. So key point here is this is utility. Then we have the next type of utility, which is where here I'm showing a blue roof, something that is more recent, certainly perhaps in the last 5 years of vocabulary for flat roofing, where we're actually purposely attenuating or retaining some water on the roof after a major rainfall event, and holding that back from the sewer system and just slowly releasing that back into the system. Here we can see on the left more schematic of what that might look like, and then the drawing section. Now, if you wanted to actually see how this operates on the Bauder website, there's a really good animation of a storm event and how the actual blue roof works. So then moving on, we have then the traditional green roof situation, which here I'm describing it for a utility roof. So if you see in the picture here, you wouldn't really describe that as amenity, it's more as utility. And we're actually, again, slowing down the water from its haste to get into the drainage systems, whilst of course having many of the other advantages of green roof of retention of dust, acoustic value. There's some argument for some thermal value as well, but this is more the traditional green roof. Then we have perhaps a newer system that we perhaps will see more of in the coming period, which is again utility roof. It's again a green roof, but perhaps with slightly thicker, slightly different growing medium or substrate that actually can act as much like a blue roof, not necessarily needing the plastic attenuation box. And this can also deal with large quantities of rainwater, and actually again slow it down from getting into the system or at one time, and obviously alleviating the pressure on the sewer systems. Now this one is, I debated long and hard as to whether I should call it utility roof or amenity. It could be both really, certainly if you're looking out onto this. And this is the more naturalistic, sustainable environment where we have wildflower or biodiverse roofs. Again, different type of utility of the roof, and certainly again having the ability to naturally break and slow the water down on the roof, but also looking very pretty, and certainly at certain times of the years with the spikes of flower, very beautiful to look at. But of course, I do have to come back to, in the end, is what goes beneath. And so all of those scenarios I've just shown all rely heavily still that the roof waterproofing keeps the water out and it keeps the energy in, and therefore we still need to have our secure waterproofing system. So on the left here, I'm showing a typical RBM warm roof, and of course we mustn't forget our typical hot melt inverted roofs, both of which used in these different systems. But a very important point is, from a sustainability point of view, is the roof waterproofing has to last a long time, and therefore that mustn't be compromised by what we're doing above it. And therefore the skill and the design that goes into what we put above needs to be done carefully to ensure we don't ruin the good work of the waterproofing. So really just a starter for 10 on the discussions today, and just indicating that there is a future and it could be above the waterproofing.
Fantastic, Nigel. Thanks for that quick whip through the different types of applications. I always find it interesting to know what can happen above a roof, coming from a roofing manufacturer background for a few years, and seeing the progression from just a standard roof, which we all know, to things that actually make it a part of the environment, part of the building that can be utilized for different things, which is really cool. So what I want to do today is get a number of questions. If anybody wants to ask a question, please use the Q&A functionality that's available in this webinar, and we can chat through that. But I've got a few questions that I'd like to cover myself as well, if that's okay. And first of which really is linked to what we titled this webinar as, which is more the changing demands within the marketplace. And that kind of links to your slides and what can be done on a flat roof now. And sort of from a commercial perspective, what are clients actually focusing on, and what are projects focusing on at the moment? Are there any trends we're seeing now and in the future?
Yes, of course, there are a number, and of course, I can't really not talk about the effect of Grenfell. So therefore, anything to do with fire on roofs is still an ongoing topic, and it does seem to keep changing with sensitivities by now. More the insurers who are having more of an effect on what's acceptable and what's not seem to be acceptable. We also have, again, really from the output of the review by Dame Hackett, was needing verified performance. So another trend is the fact that to be absolutely accurate in terms of what you're saying about the performance of your products. So of course, that's the CCPI piece, if you like. And then we have the bigger story of the environment. And so there is a very fast growing need for people to want to understand embodied carbon. And the government has been partly leading that. There's been never more people trying to understand and find information in environmental product declarations. Suddenly everybody realizes maybe what they're there for. And of course, the other side of it is the whole piece on waste and recycling. And just one example just coming in right at the minute is the new plastic tax, which will affect plastic packaging potentially. So there's just a few to be getting on with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the ones you've highlighted there are standard across the construction industry, really. To be fair, not just flat roofing. Just want to take a few of those, if you like, or maybe broaden the horizons here. And can you see what issues might arise in the long term from these types of roofs? So we looked at new applications, we looked at the different types and styles of flat roofing that are coming into trend and appearing more and more. But are there any issues with this?
Well, I suppose one of the big points that I made towards the end of the presentation there was the fact that it's one thing to get the utility out of the roof with green roofs, blue roofs, PV, etc. But one of the key cornerstones is that the waterproofing needs to have long life and be effective. And if that is easily damaged by what's happening above, then obviously it needs to be designed better. And one of the major influences on the environmental factor of flat roofs is how long they last. Is that you can have the most environmentally friendly products, but if they don't last very long, then that has to be factored into the equation. So long-lasting flat roofs is one of the biggest things that we can have for a major effect on the environmental input of a flat roof.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's always the same in any industry, isn't it? It always comes down to the fundamentals, the foundational parts of it that we need to consistency of. So we've got a question from Jules here, linking to what we were just talking about there. And the question is, are there any average figures per square meter yet to show what carbon offset or advantage there are to each type of green roof? Is there any figures available on any kind of carbon offset then?
Not that I'm aware of, and I'd be pleased if anybody was to correct me there, but there are all these different avenues now being researched in terms of what offset there is for the roof, for the insulation, for the green roof, and so sometimes bits being done in isolation, and then maybe more we need to know what it is holistically as the whole build up, because again, one of the bits that we always find when we're on the leading edge of change is people tend to drill down on individual parts rather than say the fundamentals and the core parts. So there's always bits on the edge, but they need to be brought into the whole. So the short answer is I don't know, I can't answer that, and I'd be more than pleased if anybody else can provide information on that, but it is the sort of thing that we're moving towards.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody does have any intel, all about knowledge sharing. So yeah, please get in touch. So that's focusing on the roofing part of it, if you like. I want to bring it internally now, and the importance of maintaining quality, which we mentioned in terms of it needs to stay waterproof first and foremost. What internal changes would you say would be required to facilitate market developments for the future?
Well, I suppose if I relate that back perhaps to the sort of 3 or 4 points I made in your first question, then not surprisingly, then we're going to need to be still continuing to test. It's things like fire requirements, is that there are just thousands of permutations, so that's always going to be ongoing. It is like the fourth rail bridge in terms of when you've finished your testing, you'll have to start again because they typically have a life of 5 years. We also then have what I was talking about EPDs is the fact that we need to see more product-specific EPDs. There's a lot of industry EPDs, but I think there's a lot of benchmarking needs to be done and getting more to the detail there, as opposed to, at the minute, a more wide generic understanding. Then, of course, picking up on the sort of CCPI pieces, the fact that it's having robust quality systems for product information. So it's making sure that what you're putting out there and publishing is accurate and correct and absolutely up to date, because nobody wants to be seen to be misleading by giving the wrong information. And I suppose then the other side of it is on the products and the systems, is always continually reviewing as to what we're doing with those in terms of making them, I don't know, last longer, thinner, or easier to use, and also minimizing the amount of waste. So all of those bits are always the constant thing we're looking at from the direct product side.
Okay, cool. I've got to ask as well, in terms of testing and certification, you know, how do we maintain this consistency over certifying and testing these products, but not stifle the innovative approaches?
Well, I mean, obviously there's lots of established forums for testing quality, and of course BBA is probably the most well-known, certainly in our sector, and that's going to continue, and it's getting better. But I think one of my own personal points is here is innovation. If there is something truly innovative, it needs, or it has a route, which is the ETA route. Unfortunately, there's probably quite a lot of products now that still have ETAs that are well tried and tested, and perhaps should be moving more to having standards for them. But there is a route for that, which is always there for something that just comes from left field that nobody's had before. But otherwise, it's testing against the standards that exist and are always being reviewed.
Okay, speaking of standards and regulations, we've got a question from John. Are there any regulations or planning demands regarding discharge of roof drainage into sewers?
Well, certainly in Scotland there is, and you have to design on the basis that you're retaining much of the water on site, and when releasing it at a certain flow rate. That's not the case, to my knowledge, for England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And you know, there's also sometimes the factor that sometimes the site, because we have less and less land in the cities, we're often building on sites where it takes the whole footprint of the building, takes the whole footprint of the land, and therefore it's quite difficult to do other ways of attenuating. So especially in places like London. So then, you know, the roof is a good place to do that. And then you will obviously have to have a factor of attenuation that you build into your design.
Okay, excellent. So we've got a couple of questions coming in now, which they're all really interesting. I want to try and get through, try and get your answers to these. This one comes from Gabriella. Let me read it in full, and I think then we can kind of summarize it. They ask, what can raw material suppliers do to support membrane producers of any of these new trends? She's referring to, oh, nice one, Gabrielle. I'm not going to get this. Polyolefins.
Polyolefins, yeah.
That's the one. As a base for the single ply membranes. New products, more cooperation in recycling. So I think, to summarize, basically, what can raw material suppliers do to support new ways of working, if anything?
Well, again, I covered before about the recycling. I think there is an element of needing to minimize the amount that goes into the skip on site, and what do you do with that, and can that be taken back? In Europe, they have take back schemes. there needed to be enough volume to do that for just the UK, but also enough of a driver. In the end, it's only when people start to put a cost on it that people then start to look at that. And there have been numerous schemes looked at over the years. SPRA certainly looked at it twice over the last 10 years, and each time there wasn't enough demand for it. But I think we're getting nearer and nearer to that point. As far as things like the individual materials is, again, it depends whether you look at that in the whole or individually. I was heavily involved in the BRE work for the environmental profiling of different types of membranes, and whilst FPO is technically the most environmentally friendly, it's marginally so compared to some of the others, especially when you then compare it against other materials that are used in a roofing system where the numbers are far higher. So the difference becomes very small. But it does come down to the ease of recyclability as well. And so one of the bits there could be trends in terms of how we do our systems, because actually salvaging material that you can recycle needs to be ideally clean. And so clean could mean without adhesive. How easily is the material recycled? So there are things which I mentioned again earlier on about ease of installation and making sure that there is a sort of dichotomy there of sometimes ease of installation doesn't always then make it easy to take apart.
Okay, excellent. So I want to finish with one further question from the audience, and then I'll wrap up with my own question, if that's okay. So we're back to Jules, and Jules asks, is there any kind of certification for green roof installers?
No, not that I'm aware of. But again, is that there is discussions with various other associations of because for installers there could be also landscaping companies. They're not necessarily always roofers. And so one of the bits that Grow certainly is always working on is trying to bring those two sets together so that we have landscapers that understand roofs and roofers that understand the landscaping element of it. Within our own organization is the fact that we're always looking to train and improve people to be able to do that. And it is something that needs some training, because there are a number of do's and don'ts for the installation of green roofs. So like anything is the fact that there is training required. So, but it is something that does need to be formalized more, because one of the big bits that perhaps I didn't say at the outset is, this sector is growing rapidly, and therefore it is something that we need to have the trained labor for it.
Yeah, going back to what we were discussing about the basics and the fundamentals, it has to stay watertight, first and foremost. And if you've got different trades, I can see that becoming an issue in terms of scalability and more knowledge from that perspective. Okay, final question to wrap everything up, and that's looking to future-proof any organisations within flat roofing in terms of product developments. What should organisations in this industry, i.e. flat roofing, do to keep kind of ahead of the pack or leading that innovative or product development approach to flat roofing?
Well, I suppose it goes without saying is the need to keep up with what the regulations and the standards are. And I've already mentioned a few times now just the making it easier for the installer. And one of the bits that perhaps we haven't covered so far, and we maybe just covered a little bit there, was general labor, is the fact that there is increasing shortage of decent quality labor in our industry. The average age seems to be getting higher. So that's something that we need to make it easier as well. And I suppose the other thing is just generally having reliable products that do what they're supposed to do. Now, that may seem like a very obvious thing to say, but the construction industry has been hampered for years and years and years by the latest shiny thing that comes along. And the latest shiny thing that comes along, it's amazing how quickly people throw out what their normal precautions are and jump with it and don't ask themselves, well, is it suitable for this? And so again, is the fact that in the company of BBA is the fact that we look to the BBA to look at these products and put their stamp on to say they are suitable. Because there are a number of products that end up getting used in the wrong places, or somebody thinks, well, it would be great if it could do this. But so this comes back to just the reliability and track record. Now that doesn't get in the way of innovation. Innovation though should be verified, and that's probably one of the key things is verifying the innovation.
Fantastic. I think we'll leave it there. Just looking at the time, we've run over a little bit. So Nigel, firstly from me, thank you so much for spending the time with us and answering those questions. Really interesting, really, to see how flat roofing is progressing and how we can utilize those spaces better. So firstly from me, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Secondly, everybody that's joined us today, thank you for joining us. Very much appreciated. We'll be back in April with some more webinars. So if you want to join us, go on the website, the BBA website, click on webinars and have a look at what's coming up, or sign up for the newsletter and we'll send it direct to your email. So from me, the BBA, and Nigel, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.